In my opinion, the idea of a cozy game genre is kind of strange because I really don't think it does a good job of defining what makes a game cozy. To me, a cozy game is one that I would play curled up on the couch under a soft blanket on a cold winter day. And I think this is probably true for a lot of people. But I think that the games we all envision in this fantasy are vastly different. Personally, I'm envisioning a Souls title as I write this, so not exactly part of the cozy game genre. And while I think cozy games are games associated with that peaceful, no care in the world vibe that we love to envision, I don't believe that there's an inherent genre to that. Okay, but if cozy isn't a genre, then what is it? Well, I think that there's actually a fairly simple way to define it, but that requires sifting through some red herrings that would seemingly make a game cozy, but ultimately I think only have some correlation. So let's start our discussion at one of the titans of contemporary cozy games, Stardew Valley. I don't really enjoy Stardew Valley. Now, in all fairness, maybe I just haven't given the game a fair chance. Only have about 7 hours in it after all, but it just has never hooked me. And don't get me wrong, I wish it had. It seems like everyone loves the game, and I feel like a hater for not feeling the same, but it just hasn't stuck for me. The reason I start here is because Stardew Valley wouldn't be anywhere near the top of my list of games to curl up on a couch and play, but that's through no fault of its own, it's entirely a me problem. I just get bored too quickly and I want to go play something else. And this, most simply put, is the reason why I disagree with the idea of a cozy game genre. And to clarify real quick, I do understand that the genre is just as much meant to encompass design philosophies and trends as it's meant to encompass the feelings it generates, but I think the feelings are still core to the definition and thus worth talking about. Again, I'm sure I'm not the only person out there who would put decidedly non-cozy games first on their personal list, and so I think there's something here to explore that could lead to some interesting conclusions. To narrow down what makes a game cozy, I think the easiest place to start is that the game is enjoyed by the player. Seems simple enough, right? We'd happily spend a cold winter day playing a game that we have a fun time with. For me, I really enjoyed Dark Souls 3. While I understand the frustration in the community around how it follows up the two previous titles, I think that it's still a fun game with a lot of parts to love, and I'd happily play it while just chilling. Well, that seems to answer our question pretty quickly then, of what defines a cozy game. Except, there's an issue. I like a lot of games: Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Enter the Gungeon, Nine Souls, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, Shovel Knight. These are all, in my opinion, very good games. Each of them, I feel, knew what they wanted to do when they set out, and accomplished that mission elegantly. I can easily respect the design and development of these titles, and wouldn't have any trouble at all speaking to their quality as entries in the various genres that they're a part of. All that being said, I don't think I'd be able to really immerse myself in any of these in a cozy way. Maybe I could play them for a bit, but I don't think I'd be able to lose myself in any of them for an entire day, or even really just an entire afternoon. These are not just good games, but games that I enjoy, and yet they don't have everything for me, personally, to qualify them as cozy games. So there must be something more to what makes a game cozy. Do you ever have those times where you want to play a game, but nothing sounds fun? You scroll through your Steam library and you look at the titles you have installed, and nothing really speaks to you, not even games you really enjoy? For me, thankfully, I have a go-to solution when this happens, and no, it's not touching grass. Instead, I boot up one of my installs of Hollow Knight on patch 1221, the one where I have debug mod installed, and I practice speedrun segments aimlessly for a bit. Now, to those familiar with speedrunning, that probably sounds like the antithesis of cozy, right? Speedrunning is a high-pressure activity where top runners will sometimes compete over the extra few hundredths, or even thousandths of a second that it takes to beat out others in their chosen game and category. Doesn't exactly sound relaxing, does it? What's more, I haven't been an active runner of the game in years, so why would I have any interest in doing something like this? And yeah, I agree. On the surface, it doesn't really make sense. However, I do think there's actually a pretty simple explanation. I know Hollow Knight. Yes, speedrunning is stressful, and yes, I don't run the game anymore. However, the amount of time I've sunk into the game means that everything is extremely familiar. I never feel lost in the game because I have so much experience that it all feels second nature. Given this perspective, it makes more sense how this could be a cozy activity for me. I can just sit down and let myself get immersed in the movement and gameplay. It requires enough focus to keep me from getting bored, but my knowledge of the game in these segments means that I can settle into a rhythm and just let the game happen, not having to worry and just being able to mostly relax. So are cozy games really just games we know? It would seem so, and at a distance this makes perfect sense. Cozy is all about being able to settle in, and having knowledge and confidence in what you're playing would certainly help you do that. But there's just one issue. Not every cozy gaming experience I've had has been with something that I have intimate knowledge of. Allow me to present Lies of P Overture. Finally beat this not too long ago, and it was pretty brutal. Things hit like a truck in its uncharted waters. There's not a whole lot to reduce the difficulty. Well, besides difficulty settings, but whatever. All that being said, I would genuinely call my time spent on the final boss a cozy experience. For those who haven't yet been able to experience it, I won't spoil it, but what's important to know is that this is a fast-paced, heavy-hitting boss with 2 crazy phases. So again, this raises the question, how on earth could this have been a cozy experience? At this point, we have a bit of a conundrum. It seems as though every plausible reason for what makes a cozy game has some holes in it. However, I think through all of our failed definitions, we may have finally arrived at an answer. As I see it, cozy games for a given player are any games that create minimal friction with the player's desired play experience. That sounds a little snobby and academic and whatever, so let's break that down. Every player has certain types of games that they enjoy. This doesn't mean that they can enjoy games outside that grouping, but they're more partial to games that fit that type. However, not every game of that type will necessarily play the same, and players will develop preferences as they play more and more games for how they like the flow of gameplay to be, what types of interaction they like, what sorts of situations, pressures, restrictions, etc. All of this comes together in defining a person's ideal play experience, what is required of them by the game, and what is presented to them by the game. To reiterate, I think that this is ultimately what makes a game cozy, if it fits in well with the ideal scenario for the given player. To give an example of this, I will first present Lies of P. Ultimately, what I'm drawn to in Lies of P is the experience of learning through trial and error, slowly but surely making progress until finally everything clicks into place. What's more, I like the strategy that the game incorporates. Oftentimes, especially with the game's tougher challenges, I find that I have to really think ahead with mechanics like weapon durability so that I'm not caught in a sticky situation. Last but not least, I like the relative simplicity of the game. Yes, there are some quirks to get used to, but I think overall, with the moment-to-moment gameplay, Lies of P is pretty simple at its core, and it's therefore just up to the player to leverage and master the tools they're given. So my ideal play experience is one of slow and steady progress, with some light strategy elements, all centered around a fairly simple base set of tools and mechanics. Now that that's established, allow me to introduce you to Islanders. Islanders, released by German studio Grizzly Games in early 2019, is not even remotely similar to a Souls-like. Real quick, for those unfamiliar, Islanders is a game where you build up a settlement on a procedurally generated island using different building cards. Each building placed has a raw point value, and will either give or subtract additional points from your score if it's in the proximity of certain other classes of building. The goal is simply to get as high a score as possible. The gameplay is nothing like Souls, the vibes are nothing alike, and this game is intended to be a chill game, while Souls-likes are, well, Souls-likes. On paper, this shouldn't be the game for me at all. It's so profoundly different from what I typically like to play. And yet, somehow, this is actually the only quote-unquote cozy game that I find myself ever coming back to. I won't lie and say that I play this game a whole lot, but something about it just makes it appealing to me as a way to de-stress, take a break, and just enjoy a game. Yeah, this game isn't at all similar to Lies of P, but at the same time, it actually has some surprising similarities too. We talked about slow and methodical progress. Islanders often has the player testing lots of different potential locations before they commit with their building to see what will yield them the most points. This process of trying to visually identify spots with high potential and then testing those is actually oddly similar to the rhythm of learning a boss's attack patterns. We also mentioned planning ahead. Because of the point bonuses or penalties associated with proximity between one building and another, it pays to be intentional about how you set up your settlement early so you can continue to make beneficial additions later on, and aren't trapped by poorly placed buildings that subtract away all your potential point gain. Last but not least, we talked about simplicity. Islanders is extremely simple. In fact, it's classified as a minimalist game, so that should tell you that it's quick to pick up. In short, the games that a particular player finds cozy can actually be quite diverse as long as they scratch a similar set of itches, so to speak. So to wrap things up, I have nothing against the stereotypical cozy game. I think they can be really fun, and I respect the enjoyment that people get out of them. However, because I'm that guy, I want to push back on the idea that cozy games is a logical game genre. In my opinion, it's difficult to classify games based on a feeling or vibe alone, because players are all just so different. The emotions and experiences that are created for one player are fairly likely to be quite different from those created for another player playing the same game. Thus, I think it makes more sense to consider cozy games as a malleable grouping used to express the set or type of games that, for a particular player, are able to create the cozy game experience. Okay then, you might ask, do I have another name that I think is better? When I started writing this video, I honestly didn't. I wasn't really planning on coming up with an alternative because I'm not that experienced when it comes to these types of games, and I figured I'd just make a fool of myself trying to capture them in one phrase. However, the other day, an alternative came to me that I think has some merit. There are definitely issues, but perhaps one alternative name could be slice of life games, alluding to the adjacency to life sims, but with a little bit more implied chill. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It was great to have you along for the journey. If you weren't aware, I'm actually starting development on a Souls-like with some friends, and we're super excited about the project. It's been mostly just ideas up until recently, but now we're really getting serious about this, and we want to share more about our process. If that sounds at all interesting, you can feel free to head over to our studio channel, Blue Lobster Games, and see what we've been up to. We just put out a devlog showcasing the combat mechanics for our game, and I'll leave a link in the description. Anyway, that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed this, and feel free to continue the discussion down in the comments. Thanks again, and see you around.